All right, we will go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone, and thank you for attending today's PNA Senate Seminar Series event. My name is Monica Koken, and I'm a senator on the Academic, Professional, and Administrative PNA Senate. We are delighted to see another great turnout for this virtual event series with staff from all campuses and Extension. Thank you to everyone who submitted questions or comments in advance. We appreciate and value your engagement at this event. This pandemic has introduced new and perhaps challenging ways to work and connect with colleagues and students. Our topic today focuses on how to foster and create community in your workplace. We have a cross-functional group of panelists who will share their knowledge and expertise to help you foster engagement and create a sense of community in your workplace. Joining us today are Rachel Coler-Mulholland, Dr. Marissa Holst, Patricia Izek, and Shawn Jarvis. Rachel, could you introduce yourself?
Yes, I am Professor Rachel Coler-Mulholland from the Morris campus. I teach in psychology, and I also work up in student counseling as a staff member.
Hi, everybody. My name is Marissa Holst. I'm a professor of both psychology and human services on the Morris campus. Been here for about 5 years, and I use she, her pronouns.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be with you all here today. My name is Patricia Izek, and I use she, as pronouns. I work in the Office of Human Resources on the Twin Cities campus, and I am the Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Consultant in that office. But I have the privilege and opportunity to work with many across the system. So thank you. I'm thrilled to be here with you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Shawn Jarvis. I use he, him pronouns. I am a finance professional in the Department of Medicine in the medical school. I currently am here today representing Ph.D, which is our Staff Advancing Diversity and Inclusion Committee. We do a lot of work virtually building community in the DEI space. And then also I'm here as a remote worker out of state.
Thank you, everyone. That's great. As a reminder, before we get started, please use the Q&A feature to share your question or comment. We're going to jump right in with questions because we have so many of them. Our first question is, what are some of the best practices to build meaningful relationships with colleagues when a team could be in person, virtual, or a hybrid mix? Who wants to start us off?
I guess I can. Just sort of starting from like an ideological approach. I guess I think the way that I like to approach those things are with both like empathy and authenticity, because we've all been through so much over the last couple of years that I think there's a certain requirement of honesty and like realness when it comes to reconnecting. From my perspective, we're in person. So those two things are really, I think, where I try to lead from.
I'd like to jump in on this one as well. From a city perspective, we work in the medical school, both Duluth and Twin Cities campuses. So I think building relationships for us has been very important, especially the work we've done since the murder of George Floyd in May of 20. We have hosted discussions and really open forum opportunities for people to talk from a place of vulnerability. And Zoom has given us that continued opportunity. Our Duluth companions are able to join us via Zoom, which is something we didn't have prior. And it also lends the ability to come where you are and have open, honest discussions. So I think tying back to Marissa's comments of empathy and authenticity, I think it helps with those discussions because you can kind of turn your camera off and just listen if that's where you're at the moment.
I think piggybacking off of that a little bit is also recognizing the necessity of universal design in situations like this. Keeping in mind that access has historically been denied to several very diverse groups of people in conversations of community and when it comes to coming together. And so as we move forward post-COVID, as we come out of this pandemic into endemic phases, recognizing that comfort levels and accessibility are going to be different across the board. And as Shawn said, having resources like Zoom available and utilized to their fullest ability is going to be incredibly important.
There really is very little I can add to that. Just wonderful responses. I think the one I would like everyone to focus on is the art of listening. I think listening really conveys a message to everyone that I value you. I'm here and I want to hear what you are saying. And I think often we listen very differently, right? There are many ways that we're listening. We're already trying to solve or give advice, or when all that we are asked to do is to really listen. And it's harder than it seems, especially with the amount of distractions that exist today and that beckon us, right? Constantly calling us. So I think that's a really important skill that I think personal, on a more personal level, that we can all sort of begin to build up. To become better listeners really conveys a message to our colleagues that we value each other. So, thank you.
Thank you. Robin and I are going to bounce back and forth as moderators to ask the questions. I can go with the next one. How do you build a case for the importance of in-person community building for a team who loves to be remote?
For us personally here at Morris, we spend a lot of time in person. So I don't know if Rachel and I can really speak to this as well as maybe Shawn or Patricia can.
I can. Patricia, why don't you go ahead and go first?
Oh, okay. Thank you, Shawn. I'd say ask, send out a poll, or at the next gathering, say, this is what we would like to do in the next 6 months or for the year. And we're going to do this periodically, and just ask, what would you like to see in this space? Often we assume that things that we think people need, and there's an old saying that says, nothing about me without me is for me. And it's a proverb, and I fail to, and I apologize for not knowing its origin, but an African proverb, and it's so true, and it resonates with me for every group. It's to really involve people in what it is that we're going to provide, and so I think that's very important. So, Shawn?
Sure. So my team actually is 100% remote, as just that's what people have chosen to do. I actually 6 weeks ago moved to Arizona, so I'm fully remote. And one of the things that we started early in pandemic is we had a weekly check-in. And honestly, the first thing we do is we have a truly non-work related, non-business related question, and it's usually an icebreaker. Even though most of us have been on the team together for years, it was a good way to kind of generate just authentic and get away from just the business at hand kind of a thing. And as we've moved on, we continue to do that weekly and in our check-ins. And then we have once a month we convert our check-in to what we call coffee talk. And so in that situation, we utilize the breakout sessions, and we go into small group sessions to just have recreate, if you will, virtually the notion of the water cooler talk. I think some of that has definitely helped. We've as a team, we've definitely remained cohesive and definitely gotten to know each other better. One of the other things, as we've moved closer to endemic stage, we're going to have 2 workshops in person, 100%. Everyone has to come, including me from Arizona, twice a year, to just really actually have an additional team building experience where it's truly about having that in-person component of getting to know each other and continue to work together.
I think that hits on something that's really important, Shawn, is the idea that what we want and what we need don't always line up. And so, like, when you mentioned that you're having this required twice yearly in-person meetup, it is an important aspect of that team building, that community connectedness, that ability to say, hey, we're all here on the same page. Even the ability to say, man, I can't believe we all had to come to this, is a unifying experience, right? And so I love the I love that we're leading with listening, but I also think that having that on the back end, right, of being able to say, but also is super important.
Thank you. Robin, do you have a question teed up?
Yes, I sure do. I work in an extension office in which everyone works in different fields. Please provide suggestions for when work isn't shared.
I can go first this time. I think it's an opportunity for us to be curious and to, it's hard. We work and we're busy. Everybody's focused on what they need to get done. But it's really important to allow our curiousness to come up every so often so that we, even though we don't share, we don't work together, this is not our realm of interest even, or whatever it may be, but to allow ourselves to just say, you know what, I'm going to be attending this gathering, and I don't even know why I'm there, but I'm going to approach it with some curiosity, and I'm going to go walk away with 2 things I didn't know, and challenge yourself. You know, and that's, we have to engage in order to really begin to create that sense of belonging. And without that engagement, it's very, very difficult. And no one can make you engage. And it really has to come from you. And it is more challenging when it is something that you just don't see why it is that you have to be there. So I always, you know, say you approach it with curiosity and challenge yourself to just walk away with 2 things you didn't know before you entered the space. But it's challenging, and I do understand.
Yeah, oops, sorry.
Go ahead, Marissa.
Okay. So I guess I just wanted to say that I absolutely agreed with Patricia. I think like when you approach something with a sense of curiosity, with a sense of openness, the outcome can be so many different things. I think if you keep your mind shut to, or like the door shut to, you know, the idea of learning about other things or engaging in different types of work, like it can only be bad. It can only suck, you know? So I really do like this, the sort of idea that Patricia posits there, because yeah, I mean, keeping your sort of brain open. I'm a little biased. I come from an interdisciplinary background, and there's a lot of merit to the idea of different disciplines or different jobs working together when it comes to problem solving, policy making, those types of things. And so I really do definitely agree with Patricia on the front of, you know what, keep your mind open, be curious. Otherwise we get stagnant, we get bored. And yeah, I think when you have that sense of openness too, I think that it builds community in that sense. Like you don't shut yourself off from other people.
Well, and just from a purely fostering community perspective, as opposed to through the lens of work, right? Like we're also all people. And so one of the things, if we think back to kindergarten, 1st grade, right? One of the ways to bring people together is to have a shared activity. Right. So if we can all come together, and one of the things that we do on our campus is every spring we have a commission that hosts letting people do flower arranging. Right. And the supplies are provided. Everybody who wants to come and participate in the shared activity from all walks of life, from all disciplines, from all service units, etc., can come together and they have the shared activity. And because your hands and mind are engaged in this activity, it actually takes down some of the barriers of communication and allows you to see each other as humans, right? As opposed to you work in that unit, I work in this unit, you're faculty, I'm staff, right? Like it brings down some of those barriers. And so when you are at an extension office, right, and everybody's doing different work, you're all still people that could do, maybe if you're from a practical standpoint looking for a suggestion, a shared activity is a great one. We just did cookie decorating this week.
That's fabulous. It's a great idea. A follow-up question. This was asked. Something I think about is that often the organizing social experiences feel like old school, gendered, invisible work, and no one's job actually includes organizing our office into a shared sense of community. How do we have equitable experiences of social organizing that doesn't fall on the women in the office or the same few people always doing that same type of emotional labor?
I'm gonna jump in on this one because I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but to a certain extent, we're not gonna reinvent the wheel tomorrow, right? Like there are people who are good at socially organizing, and there are people who that's not gonna be their strong suit. They have other skill sets. And so this might not be the answer that maybe everybody would agree with, but I will say that there are people who want to take on that mantle of social organizing. And there are people who want to take on the mantle of making sure that we have trash bags ordered, right? That we're all going to take different jobs. We all have different talents. So asking that everybody take on the role of social organizing that doesn't make sense. Now, to make sure that it's equitable, that's another conversation. And that I think comes down to truly identifying it as a job, right? I don't think we recognize that building community and doing the social organizing is a role, like it is a job. And so from a management perspective, it has to be viewed as work, right? It's not a bonus, it is a role. And so I think the step towards making it equitable, the first step is recognizing it as a role rather than asking that everybody do it.
I think I absolutely agree, which is not shocking, but I think it was a good example of what Rachel is talking about. Is we were on a couple of the same committees. Rachel and I both are, and we tend to be people that like to take on the role of organizing things. We're yes people. And so, but what's really important is on the committee that we are on, that other people on that committee are aware of that and are aware of how important equity is. So when we do tend to take on more things, there are people on that committee that will say like, hey, you said yes a lot. Can we talk about how we can make this more equitable? So what Rachel's saying about like people recognizing how this can be inequitable, that recognition, so important.
I often say the work of equity really requires you have a mirror because you need to see yourself in a very honest way. And when you're in these settings where something has been introduced and there's an opportunity for this role to take on, right? And you have to really just peek in that mirror and say, oh, I haven't done anything in a while. I'm not ready to take the lead, but I will throw my name in. That's the only way to truly create that sense of community that everybody's doing their part. And if you don't want to be visible, there are other roles you can take, but it really starts with looking at yourself and saying, you know, this is where I work. This is my team. What can I do to help? You know what? I'll send the email out because I don't want to be part, so put me on email patrol, or I will take care of the RSVP. There's so many parts of this that can be taken on. So just take a peek in that mirror and say, oh, I need to step up. So, yeah, or step back, right? Yeah, to create that vacant opportunity for someone else.
I'm always here for some, self-awareness. So I like that.
Thank you. Robin, did you have a question to ask next, or I can go ahead? Oh, you're still muted.
Yeah. So we have one here that there are extra challenges for those of us who work across the university and not just with our own team or unit. Do you have any suggestions on how to create a community when people are not on the same team or unit? And then also, this is sort of related, is that if you have a small team, but you contain, people who are P&A, folks who are civil service and labor represented, how do you kind of create, connections?
I'd like to jump in first because the work that I do with Sadie is, so it is medical school specific, but we have many departments and centers within the medical school. So everything we do is cross-functional. It's not like when I'm at Sadie, I'm dealing with people from all different departments, civil service bargaining unit and P&A. Interestingly enough, when we don't have space, we get to say no to faculty, which is a fun place to be because it's kind of nice to not be excluded when you're staff, which does happen often. But I think, we have found really great success in making sure that we're able to communicate with all of the people we're trying to reach to participate and bring them to the table to have the conversations we're having. And we find when we do that, it kind of almost fosters you're there for a common purpose, regardless of what team or if you work with people anyway. So it tends to help build that community on its own. We actually had a lot of good momentum last fall where we had a series of events that brought people to the table to just talk about where are they in the DEI space, and especially around anti-racism and acknowledging where they need to learn and be vulnerable. And it really did actually build a sense of community. And a year later, the people that have stayed with us from that series a year ago are still here and actually still participating in the conversations because they find that's a great place to come and learn and know that they're not an expert and that they actually have things to do. So I think you just have to put it out there. I don't think it matters like for the teams in my own perspective. I mean, we're all doing with Sadie, we're all doing it because we have a passion around the topics. And we also realize we have to be a part of building that community. I hope that made sense.
I'm kind of uniquely situated in this position to answer this question because I am part of two different units entirely, right? Like I'm faculty, but I'm also staff. And I can say that I think the biggest factor for this for myself, right, as somebody who has to bridge that gap, is that both of those existing units do very concerted, like they make a very concerted effort to include me in the team, right? I'm not excluded because I have dual roles. I'm not viewed as different or other, and they make it very explicit. It is both implied through action, but also explicitly stated, like you're part of the team, right? I'm included on all of the emails. I'm invited to all of the meetings, even if I can't go, right? There's a meeting this afternoon that I can't attend because I'm teaching class, but I was still on the invite. I'm still part of all the planning. And so I think, again, from a practical perspective, I think a lot of it comes to, as you were saying, like making sure that that is the goal, right? That we all recognize that underlying all of this work, community is necessary for it to be sustainable.
I would, and you just said it, it's like making inclusion the goal. I loved how you're included in both. And they obviously know you're not going to make everything, but to err on the side of inclusion is always a good model. And I'm very fortunate because I often come into units where I'm working with them and I can't believe that they don't all know each other. And I say, wait, what? And it happens even in OHR, we're about 200 and there are people there that I have not had the opportunity to cross paths with. So it's again, that challenge and to do it, but it's that inclusion, right? To create that opportunity of inclusivity that then we have that opportunity to connect with each other. I love that, Rachel.
Yeah, somebody commented that they learned of this quote by Reverend Jennifer Bailey of Faith Matters Network. Relationships are built at the speed of trust and social change happens at the speed of relationships. So that seems very appropriate with this conversation.
Was another part to the question. Thank you, Robin. It was about having the mix of labor represented, P&A, civil service, and faculty. That to me is wow. That's wonderful. Groups like that is what we should strive to create every single time. because that's where you get that input and richness of what our similarities are, but where maybe inequities exist, what it is that we can work on together, how we can, it's just, to me, that's a wonderful situation that does not happen often enough. So kudos to the folks who put this together, because you opened it up to everyone, and that's really the way it should be. So thank you.
Thank you. Next question we're going to ask is, do individuals in leadership roles receive any special training on how to foster support for this with their teams? And they said, personally, I feel like there are a lot of negative feelings surrounding this. So I was excited to see this webinar. And we had a few other, couple other questions come in about how to engage with management. And maybe we can lump those together too. But do you have any suggestions or comments on how leadership either receives training, or what could happen to help understand or engage with management when the tone is being set and they're disengaged from anything that their employees are working on? There seems to be quite a bit of disengagement from management.
I can speak to that. We have supervisor training that is available. And we also have leadership training that is available for individuals going up the ladder to higher positions of chairs and deans and all of that is available here at the institution. And I often think that even if you go through it, there's so much more that you can accomplish. There are, if for any reason you would feel that is not all that you need, that you would like more, I encourage you to speak to your supervisors to get the extra training or whatever that you feel that has not been met by what we offer. But managing people is not for everyone. And sometimes that is the only path forward. And that is something that I think you need to individually revisit and decide, is that really the path I want, or do I need to look for something different? Because managing individuals is not for everyone. And it does require skill and patience and listening and being able to advocate for those that report to you. So it's challenging. And we are a huge institution. And also, I don't manage people here at the institution. I have in my past. But also, as now someone who has a supervisor, as we all do, is to realize, that we are all trying to do, I have to believe that we're all trying to do the best we can. And that keeps me going personally. So if I see that someone could do better with certain skills, if I have a book I can offer, I will wrap it up and give them a book or something. It's just, there are different ways to approach things. And I encourage you to seek out assistance if you feel that your manager or supervisor is not doing the right thing.
Our next question that we'd like to follow up is related to Zoom and living in a world where we see people in boxes. How do you have meaningful Zoom and in-person meetings when there is real engagement and less of this is a business meeting? And how can supervisors and managers help facilitate this more effectively? Shawn, is this something that you've had to deal with, being remote? And how do you have these large group meetings where some people are in person and some people are remote?
Well, I knew I'd be called on the spot for this one, and I was trying to think of how to answer it for multiple reasons. So one of the examples I have is you know, some of it I think depends on how you lead your meetings. And I find as a new supervisor, having to have my check-ins with my direct reports remotely, which they're remote too. So you know, it's a two-way thing, is not just jumping into everything being right out the gate business. I mean, there's part of having a natural conversation, you know, how are you? How are things going? What's going on? And making a point to actually starting, like with my check-ins, one of my employees likes to jump right in with questions. And I'm like, no, how's it going? What's going on? How are you, you know, what are you working on? And how, you know, what's going on around you? And so I think part of it is is doing it that way. And that's kind of how I approach pretty much all of my meetings. I know from a Sadie perspective, for staff in the medical school, those of us on Twin Cities campus, we have a large mix of people who are in some sort of hybrid arrangement or remote. And in Duluth, we have people who participate from Duluth who are mostly in person, but yet engaging with our Sadie events via Zoom. And one of the more recent examples, so we do a bi-monthly event called Connect and Learn. And so it's a journal club style thing where people have some pre-work to do, like reading articles, listening to TED Talks. And then we come together and have a discussion about, you know, what we read and those kinds of things. And there was one particular month where Duluth wanted to have their own breakout room, if you will, which managing breakout rooms in Zoom is a little terrifying anyway. And then to have this group that you want them to be in their own space. And so it was an interesting thing because they got to have an in-person conversation for their breakout session. So only one person obviously logged into our group and they were all in a conference room. And then we put them in their own room. But it was a really cool thing where they got to be a part of this Zoom group where we got to have, like, we're all learning together. And then when we went into our individual breakout sessions, they had their own discussion as a group. And, you know, while we were all having ours, and then we all came back and we were able to share things. And, you know, initially we were all of us in the planning group were kind of apprehensive. How are we going to make this work? Will it actually be successful? How are we going to manage to screw it up, if you will? But it was really successful. And hopefully we can do it again. It just kind of varies by topic on how many people participate. So I think it's truly a matter of thinking about how do you normally engage and communicate with people and bring that to the Zoom meeting so that it isn't, okay, well, we're here to talk about X and get it done and move on. I mean, we're still humans, even though we're squares on a screen. And there's something to be said for, you know, hey, let's have a coffee and how are things going? I have a question. Can we dive into that now? Kind of a thing. That's how I approach all of mine. I mean, even with my own supervisor, I think we actually spend a good 20-30 minutes of my 1 hour check-in just catching up first and then diving into the business. But I think that's the approach I tend to take.
Shawn, I love how you sometimes have articles or something that they do before they meet. That provides such a safety net for so many individuals that feel that they're going to be put on the spot. Whereas if you say, hey, everybody read this article or watch or listen to this podcast or watch this YouTube and just have a few questions there. So then they know and they arrive with, okay, I know that it'll go this way. But I love that. And also that, you know, these little rectangles have really challenged us because our whole personality doesn't come across, right? And I think that's a miss until we became comfortable with this. And to provide that space to network, I belong to the diverse community of practice here, that because of COVID, we extended it to everyone throughout the system. And we are a 500 plus group now. Obviously, not everybody shows up for every meeting, but it is really wonderful. And we decided that one of the missing parts of it by having gone virtual were at the beginning of every meeting, people would arrive and there was a little chit chat and everybody saying hello, hadn't seen each other in whatever since the last meeting. And so we decided that we could recreate that, just as you said, Shawn, by creating breakout rooms. And we keep them random, which is a little bit less challenging. And we give people 2 prompts. So we do 2 sets of 10 minutes each, where people get a chance to reconnect and say what they're working on. And we provide prompts. We haven't given them any reading material yet, but maybe in the future, I'm not sure. But anyways, I love that. And I think you see then when you get down to the business, people are more relaxed. And it's a wonderful thing to see in our little rectangular world.
Thank you. Robin, did you have a question teed up? Oh, you're still muted.
Apologies, everyone. So how do you create community across the generations, Gen X, millennials, boomers?
I mean, I guess I'll wade into the fire on this one. Some of it comes down to being able, I mean, to like we've said a few times throughout this, is recognizing the humanity in each other, and recognizing that we do have shared experiences. And though we do have very obvious generational divides in some ways, right? Technological literacy being one of them, and not necessarily literacy, but engagement, right? I'm not necessarily going to go to every one of my boomer colleagues and show them my most recent TikTok, but I also might, right? Recognizing that some of the things that we think divide us can actually be some of those things that bring us together, and that I can learn things from my colleagues that have obviously been here significantly longer than I have, and I can teach them things as well. So it's not a very practical answer, but again, it all comes back down to recognizing our humanity and being willing to include each other in the jokes, in the learning, in the fun, right? I can teach you a TikTok dance. It's a good time.
That's awesome. Next question, in that same vein of somebody commented, our group has an established community, but then we were reorganized and split into 3 different groups. Our leaders want to create a new community, seemingly through some mandate, but don't seem to welcome the previous community. How do you get the leaders to better understand that their mandate isn't community building? That one's a tough one because it's the antithesis of this topic.
It reminds me of being in school and being told that this is your group, and you just look and say, "This isn't my group." What are you talking about, right? That is difficult. Management sometimes has reasons in why they want to create these groups, and it's about having difficult conversations, right? It's about sitting down with them and saying, I appreciate this opportunity that you've created this group for me, but I feel that my best skills are not being used in this group. And then allow them an opportunity to maybe explain why it is that this was done. But it really comes down to creating that space to have a conversation. And sometimes we resist change. Change is hard for us. And I've often thought that, I learn the most when I'm challenged the most, right? So maybe to consider, well, maybe let me see what I'll learn from this, and then I'll have the difficult conversation if I decide that this is not working. But yeah, that's a tough one. Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree. I don't work in management, obviously, but what I'm thinking about when I'm reading that question is that someone's not listening. Somebody might be speaking, but someone's not listening. So what I'm thinking there is like management needs to change in its sense of how it's approaching the people in the smaller committees, right? So like asking those people what they need or how they need to be supported and what they would need to feel connected to one another, instead of like mandating, sort of universal things that everybody, we have all been in those meetings where you're sort of forced to do certain things to connect, and you're like, I don't like this. And I think there are some places where that is community building, as Rachel has already pointed out, but also like I think it's also indicative of a disconnect between management and their sort of constituents in that way. And so having that, bringing in that humanity component of like, let's just have a conversation about like what you need from me and what I need from you, and sort of meeting each other, 50-50 as like human beings, I think is really, really important.
It feels very like, I know he eats paste, but you have to play with him anyway, right? It feels very like, you don't get the option of not hanging out with that person. And it's like, but I don't have to, like, I can work with them and we can work but I don't have to, you can't force me to be besties with somebody. That's not a thing, right?
This gets into one of the questions of how do you approach talking about the unwritten rules or the norms of your group and addressing them to then modify them if necessary, or acknowledge that, yes, we have this and this is something that we value and want to continue. But how do you have that tough conversation to address unwritten rules and norms within a team?
I love this question and I would like to talk about it, in part because it's two separate questions. The first is, how do you address the unwritten rules and norms? And that, like, they shouldn't be unwritten, right? Like, we all have, all societies have unwritten rules and norms, but part of becoming inclusive, part of universal design, part of community building is recognizing what those are, right? So whatever the community is, whether it's your Commission on Women and Gender Equity, or whether it's your SADE, or whatever it is, there should be people who can literally at the drop of a hat say, these are the things that we do that matter to us. That has to be something that, like, it's that mirror piece, right, Patricia, where part of equity and diversity and inclusion is being able to hold that mirror up and say, this is who we are, right? And so that's the first question. And then the second question is, how do you have conversations about it? And if it's hard to have that conversation, maybe you need to reassess what the unwritten rules and norms are, because maybe it's hard to talk about it because they're not great rules and norms.
That's great, Rachel. And they hurt, who they really hurt? They hurt the individuals that we say we want to bring to this institution the most. They hate the historically marginalized individual. They really hurt, I think I said, they really hurt our international folks that don't understand our norms and rules and regulations, right? We finally get someone on board that we're so happy it is someone that identifies differently, is diverse, differently abled, whatever it may be. But then we begin to judge them by how they behave because they don't know our unwritten rules. And what we say is, yes, you hire for diversity, right? But you onboard for assimilation. And you can't have it that way. I mean, you can do it, but what's going to happen is that you create the sense of not belonging, of unwantedness and undervalue. And it won't be long before they'll realize that this is not the place for them. So these really need to be looked at and addressed. And it's not that they're bad. That's not what I'm saying. But decide which ones, like you said, Rachel, are still vibrant and really should be part of who we are, and share them. Share them so that everybody has the same opportunity to do them well. But that isn't often what happens. It's a snickering. Oh, did you see how they did it? And it's like, well, did you share? Did you tell them? So yes, thank you, Rachel. That was great.
Well, and I think too, when you disregard those things, those are often the reasons why people leave. They go other places. And then you sort of have these conversations about like, well, I don't understand why people are leaving, more like these departments or, education or whatever it is in general. Well, it's like I don't know, you're like trying to make people fit into these. It just is a very interesting, I think it's a very important way to look at those things. Like that's why people leave, when they don't feel connected and when they don't feel like wherever they're working for, the institution or the group values who they are as people.
This seems to tie into the feeling of burnout. And if people aren't feeling connected in some fashion, it will help. It just add another thing onto the list of feeling very burnt out about your job and wanting to leave and go elsewhere, or quietly quitting in the job that you're doing and just withdrawing.
Well, I mean, imagine how much time and energy and emotional energy and actual energy that you spend, for lack of a better descriptor, masking, right? you don't know the unwritten norms and rules. So you're going to dial everything about yourself back, and you're spending so much of your energy doing the fitting in that no, there isn't anything left to do your best, to do extra, to do more. And so then you're like, this is not worth the time and energy that I'm putting into it. I'm going to find somewhere where I fit better. And that speaks to a privilege piece too, right? Like it speaks to those of us who are able to just fluidly run with the rules and norms that are unwritten because we have the privilege of having grown up in these cultures, or because we have the ability to mask a little bit easier, whatever. Yeah, it absolutely, it dovetails into the burnout piece. Exactly.
Yeah, you layer that then on top of like what else we're sort of experiencing outside of like our work and our jobs, like you have just like this you're constantly inundated with the things that are going, that are big and scary in the world. And then you add on this other layer of the masking at work, people are exhausted. And so like that sort of question about burnout, or sort of having a conversation about burnout as it relates to creating and fostering community is really important, because I think it changes the way that you have to approach that. We can't approach building community and connecting with other people the same way that we did pre-pandemic. And even like the way we did at, when like it started to end, so to speak. Like, I think it's continuing to change.
There's a follow-up question for this. I would love any tips for working on a small team with members who have a lot of conflict between themselves, parenthetically, but not with me.
I just want to validate that that's tough, first of all, right? Like you're probably being put in a situation where you're getting triangulated a little bit from time to time. Ooh, I just want to validate that that's rough for starters.
Deep breath, definitely. Your own well-being is very important. But we have resources here. Don't feel you have to do it all yourself. If things aren't working, you have to let your supervisor know. There's conflict resolution. We have consultants in human resources that are more than happy to assist. You should not take these sort of situations on as it's your obligation or your duty, or that you have to solve it. Don't add to it if at all possible. Take care of yourself and make others aware that we have a real problem here. We have an issue that needs to be looked at and resolved, and it may be welcomed by both groups. Not realizing just that sometimes situations can become toxic without them needing to reach those levels. If someone sees it early on and intervenes and say, I think we could really use from someone coming in and just having a conversation with all of us together, and it doesn't have to be a huge thing, but definitely there's assistance here in the institution. Do not try and take on the role of you having to be the solver.
Looks like we have some more questions related to management and trying to work with managers. And one of the pre-submitted questions kind of gets into this as well, where it was related to the supervisor wants everyone knowing everything that wants all team members to know what everyone else is doing and knows how to do the same work that everyone else is doing, instead of allowing for differentiation and specialization. And then this question comes up: what do you do with the supervisor who thinks saying the word team in capital letters louder and louder will create the team? How do you have them understand that this isn't working and we want to do what we are good at, and that doesn't necessarily mean that we have to do the same thing in order to be a team?
I think the hard part about that is that this is where boundaries come in, right? Like we only have control over our own behavior. There is nothing you can do to make your supervisor understand that, to make your supervisor change what they're doing, right? That sucks. Like there's nothing to say other than that really sucks. You can't change how they're handling this. What I could say, and the things that I think I've seen work in my own work environment is yes, and it's an improv thing, right? So they're saying, we want you to build a team, and we're just going to say team louder. Okay, what you're doing isn't working. I hear that you want team. Here's my suggestion. Here is what we think would build our team. Here's 4 of us who've built a team. And yes, there's 8 of us who haven't joined it yet, but we're starting. We're yes anding you. And hopefully, again, you can't control their behavior on the return end of this conversation, but hopefully you're met with a yes and. When we see forward momentum, it tends to continue going that way, right? We see momentum being a thing. That has historically worked where I'm at, but I would love to hear what Shawn and Patricia and Marissa have done on their versions of this.
You know, this reminds me sort of a meal, and you're going to prepare this meal for everyone to come and enjoy. And the main chef wants everyone to do everything. And right, that's the supervisor. Everybody's going to do everything. And I just have to laugh because 1, I'm not a cook. And if you want me to do everything in that kitchen, outside of washing vegetables, you are in for a treat. Now, it's an opportunity for me to learn, right? Of course, yes, absolutely. But I think that sometimes it is really important for us to notice what people are really good at, what they want to do. And at those times when there's urgency to get the work done, do it that way. But when there is no urgency and it's a casual meal and we're all open to everyone being part of it, then yes, give me the opportunity to do everything to prepare that meal. But then you have to be ready and not judge what the result is. And I think that's often difficult for people to do because then we judge. And so as I think is to help supervisors understand that, yeah, I'm willing to learn. This is great. You know, if I learn new skills, I can put those on my resume. That's awesome, right? You're helping me expand my horizons. But at the same time, what is it that we're working on? When does it have to be done? Because I also don't want to feel this tremendous pressure for me to have to do things that I just are not in my wheelhouse at this time. So I think that's important that these things be communicated as well. And if it is, then you'll enjoy a really good meal, you know, so.
Excellent. I think the next question we want to ask, and some people have put in Q&A some great links to some reading materials. Someone commented, Chad Littlefield of We and Me has capitalized on connections, and there's a link to that. Another one is there's a free resource related to how to make virtual engagement easy. There's a link to a website for that. But somebody asked, what is the best book, article, or podcast on building authentic community at work?
I really enjoy listening to Unlocking Us. It's a podcast by Brene Brown. Every single episode is different, but she has different experts come on to talk about things like equity, to talk about things like psychological safety, to talk about things like burnout. And all of those pieces are a part of this broader discussion. So I've always really enjoyed that podcast. Also, her book, Rising Strong, is another one that sort of teaches some of the things that we've talked about today, like skills in terms of like on an interpersonal level, on the individual level. And then I think she has one geared specifically towards the workplace called Dare to Lead. Yes, Rachel got it for me. Dare to Lead is the other one that's built specifically for workplace related sort of issues and things like that. So those would be my suggestions.
I'm terrible about questions like this because if you ask me like, what's your favorite book? I'm like, I've never read a book in my life. I don't know what you're talking about. Books? What books? I'm the wrong person to ask this question. What's your favorite song? Music? What's music?
Yeah, these
Rachel,
questions really put you on the spot.
that was the best answer possible. I'm sitting here racking my brain on this, and because we do, in Sadie, we do a connect and learn, and part of our planning is finding podcasts and finding books and finding articles. And honestly, what we've used in Sadie is all very much topic related, and it's definitely not about community. It's more about, anti-racism. It's the different books we've read, the different podcasts. When I think about community though and building, one of the most recent podcasts we utilized, we talked about voter suppression, and we featured Stacey Abrams. And while her work is very much political in nature, her approach, I found, is very informative from a community and educational perspective. And so she's somebody I would look up. And of course, Marissa's suggestions are top of mind, but honestly, I don't think there's a way to read something to help you with community building. It's more about action and coming together around a topic or around a thing and just having a conversation. I think pick a podcast or a book you want to talk about with your friends or your coworkers and build community around that event, around that item, around that discussion.
Well, and I will say, sorry, one thing. I will say, if you do want to have an idea about, like, if you're worried about the social aspect of community building, right? So some people, there is a social anxiety piece to it, right? They're like, I know people well. That's fair. This is a great one. It's also Brene Brown, because that woman is phenomenal. And it's called I Thought It Was Just Me, but It Isn't. And it is a great way to help see your own humanity and the humanity in others, which is of course a theme that we've talked about throughout this discussion.
I think all of the above are just wonderful, but I agree, Shawn, you're absolutely right. I think in order to create the best and how to create community is to do the work on yourself first. To again, look in that mirror and really recognize who you are and how you enter space. And you really have to consider what is going on around us today. And we are in turmoil. We're all upset about not having been taught history properly. And so the first thing I would recommend is to really take it upon yourself to educate yourself on the topics of today. And just yesterday, the Carlson lecture over at Northrop Auditorium, right? We had Nicole Hannah-Jones, and I apologize because it wasn't a virtual event, but to really take it upon yourself to read the authors of today that are sharing and being vulnerable with us, and for us to take the time to learn and to be with it, and then to enter those spaces where community, and we can add to community, is really, really important. So it's to do the work, Yeah, thank you. That's a good question too. They've all been.
Thank you so much. We're running out of time. We have less than 2 minutes left. This hour has gone by so incredibly fast. I know that we still have some questions that were asked live, as well as questions that were submitted in advance. What I would ask is we will have these questions in a notes document, and I will share that out to our panelists and give them the opportunity to type in answers so we can try to get everyone's questions answered after the fact. I expect that it'll take us about a week and a half to get through that process. So be expecting our participants. I will send out the email with the recording and a link to the notes document in about 2 weeks' time once we get a chance to review our notes and collect more responses on that. So thank you, everyone. I wish we had more time. This hour went by so incredibly fast. I can't believe it. And yes, there's one question here. Email us with the titles of the recommended books. We are jotting that down in our notes document, and we will have links to those books and podcasts and stuff. So we'll make sure that that's out there. So in closing, since it is 1 o'clock, on behalf of the PNA Senate and everyone attending today, I wanted to thank our panelists, Rachel, Marissa, Patricia, and Shawn, for sharing your knowledge and expertise. This has been a really great conversation. It backs up some of the other events that we've hosted here. We're talking about burnout, talking about different things like that, that this really brings it all together. And how do we move past this point of isolation so that we can get back into some normalcy, but knowing that it needs to be different. So we really appreciate the time that you took with us today. And thank you so much for that. Again, a link to the recording and a notes document will be available within about 2 weeks and sent to all registrants and participants. And lastly, the plug for Senate governance. If you're interested in learning about Senate governance, please visit the usenate.umn.edu website. And then thank you again, everyone, and please enjoy the rest of your day.
Gracias.
Thank you.